Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Thursday, December 11th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, Procurement could decide whether AI succeeds or fails in government. Plus, can fixing the Pentagon's back office make the front line stronger? Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The 8A Small Business Contracting Program is in a fight for its life. From Capitol Hill to the courts and now to the executive branch, the 47-year-old program is facing questions about its legitimacy and challenges to its true impact like never before. For more on how the increased level of scrutiny is putting the 8A contracting program in the crosshairs, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, joins me now. Jason, great to have you.
Always a pleasure.
There has been a lot of news about the 8A program in the past few weeks. What are you seeing there?
There's three different and really related attempts to really rein in, change up, really maybe even end the 8A program as we know it today. And I'll go through each of them real quick, and then we'll delve deeper into them separately. The most recent one happened, I think, this week with the Small Business Administration sending a letter to more than 4,300 8A firms seeking a lot of data, and they want that data by January 5th. So it's going to be a very busy holiday season for a lot of these firms. The second one, also earlier this week, and it's building upon, is Senator Joni Ernst, the chairwoman of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. She actually wrote a letter to 22 agencies calling them to halt all new 8A sole source awards for the short term until the SBA completes its audit, which that letter to those 4,300 8A firms was part of. And then finally, in mid-November, right before Thanksgiving, a conservative public interest organization called the Center for Individual Rights, they teamed up with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty and filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court for the Eastern District in Louisiana, trying to force the repeal of the program as we know it. So again, a lot going on, but each of these is, again, trying to increase the scrutiny, trying to really push agencies. Do we really want to award? And also really puts the pressure on these 8A firms.
Well, let's take them one at a time. What do we know about the SBA's audit, and what should 8A firms keep in mind as this process unfolds?
This dates back to earlier in the summer when the USAID contracting officer owners of three companies all pled guilty for their roles in a decades-long bribery scheme involving 14 prime contracts under the 8A program worth more than $550 million. This really rose that level of, okay, what's going on here? Behind that was an October video from O'Keefe Media Group, a right-wing activist organization focused on ATI Government Solutions. Again, they admitted in that video, the ATI Government Solutions, to defrauding the SBA's 8A program. So all of this resulted in SBA saying, we're going to take a deep dive into the 8A program and do a complete audit. They sent a letter to 4,300 firms earlier in the week. We got a copy of that letter. And by January 5th, 8A vendors must send to SBA data sets around 15 different questions. Now, these range from anything from general ledger for the last 3 fiscal years to bank statements for the last 3 fiscal years to the all employees, list of all employees, all vendors they worked with, all copy of all 8A contracts, a lot of data that has to be put together. And basically what SBA is saying is A, you need to send us this information. And if you don't send this information, there will be problems. Basically, either A, you'll be kicked out of the program, or there'll be other investigative or remedial action that's going on. There's a lot of discussion around what this means, this letter on LinkedIn. And Rob Wong, who's a former associate administrator for SBA's Office of Government Contracting and Business Development, basically said this type of investigation now raised the level. It's not just going from an administrative investigation, but really to a legal and compliance investigation. And that's why I think this is really turning up the heat on the 8A program.
So that makes a lot of sense, a lot of scrutiny there. What do we know about the lawsuit, and how is it different from previous ones that forced SBA to make some changes to the program in the last year or so?
So this was followed by the Center for Individual Rights. And they're not new to challenging the 8A program. They actually brought what they call the ultimate lawsuit to court in 2023, eventually winning the case. That led to SBA making some changes. requiring participants to provide a narrative about why they are socially and or economically disadvantaged. But this is even broader than the Ultima case. I talked to Mike Petrino, the organization's lead attorney, and he says Ultima, they were just worried about a single client. They thought the SBA rules are harming the client by the use of their rule. This one really is harmed by other offices applying the SBA rules. So other agencies who are taking the SBA regulations and then using them. They are basically challenging the regulation issued by SBA that creates a legal presumption that every individual who is a member of certain races or ethnicities are socially disadvantaged. So this is a much deeper, broader one. And really what CIR and the Wisconsin Institute want is not necessarily an end to the 8A program, but they just want to remove any racial preferences that they believe SBA inserted into the law. And so they want the kind of to go back to what the Constitution and the Section 8A of the Small Business Jobs Act really outlined back 40-some years ago.
Senator Ernst's letter seems to tie these things together. There's some underlying presumptions about the value of the 8A program, and she's leading the scrutiny from Capitol Hill. So what is she asking agencies to do about their sole source contracts?
Absolutely. She has been the biggest voice on Capitol Hill, saying that this is a problem, that this program is what she called a magnet for fraud. And she points to, obviously, the USAID case, and now the ATI Government Solutions allegations as examples of that. And basically what she did in her letter is to say, first of all, to these 22 agencies, halt all new 8A sole source awards. And then this comes also after she introduced legislation that would also suspend all 8A sole source contracts until SBA completes their audit. So she's kind of taken it from both a legislative approach and, hey, I'm the powerful chairwoman of this committee. You should do what I say as well. Now, what basically she is saying in these letters is she believes there's enough evidence and there's enough history, whether it's GAO reports or SBA's Office of Inspector General or now Justice Department, that's exposing what she calls the rot of the 8A program, which are sloppy oversight, weak enforcement measures that has allowed 8A participants to act as quote-unquote pass-throughs and also snagging these unlimited no-deal bids with little transparency. So she feels like, by December 22nd, she would like each agency to respond to her letter. Do you plan to suspend 8A sole source contracting? And then on top of that, she also wants agencies to review all sole source and set aside contracts that they've awarded since 2020. Again, looking out for fraud, looking out for waste, looking out for kind of these concerns. So I think when you put it together, there's a lot going on, the through line that really puts 8A program under an intense amount of scrutiny and really could end up changing the way the program works and has worked for much of the last 47 years.
And Jason, you take all of those and add to them the fact that many agencies have significantly downsized their small and disadvantaged business offices. If you're an 8A owner, what should you be thinking about in 2026?
There's a couple things. Now, going back to Rob Wong, who's now a managing executive at Deepwater Point & Associates, he offered some guidance for companies. First of all, if you're going to respond to and you should respond to the SBA letter, don't miss their deadline, file on time, ensure all your documents support ownership, control, continued eligibility, verify your teaming agreements, confirm your performance documentation matches what you proposed and what you certified, be thorough. So that's all in response to the SBA letter. On top of that, really what I think a lot of 8A firms should start thinking about is how can they get to their member of Congress, how can they get to their broader community to say, yes, there are some bad apples, but not all apples are bad. And we shouldn't throw out the entire bunch because there are a few bad apples. You can look at any program across any part of government, whether it's a contracting program or otherwise, and see that there are problems, but it does not mean the entire program is bad. And I think right now, I've asked the National Association of 8A companies to comment on several of my articles. They've always declined to comment. I think between an organization like that and then some of the other ones, like whether it's the Coalition for Government Procurement or Professional Services Council or whomever, those companies in these associations should get those associations to begin to speak up and ring the alarm bell. Because again, these programs have served well for a lot of companies for a long time. And this is not to say there's no problems. I'm sure there are. But again, what seems to be happening is this idea that these two cases of fraud represent the entire program.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks so much for connecting the dots for us.
Always a pleasure.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, can fixing the Pentagon's back office make the front line stronger? This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A new Deloitte report argues that inefficiencies in HR, finance, IT, and acquisitions are draining DoD's resources from warfighting. It calls for an AI-first overhaul to fuel lethality and readiness. Tom Muir, former DoD leader and specialist executive with Deloitte, is here to explain what it will take to transform mission support and why this time might be different. Tom, thank you so much for joining me.
And Terry, thank you for having me on your show.
Deloitte's got a new report out that suggests that inefficiencies in mission support functions are diverting resources from warfighting. Can you start by walking us through the central argument there? How do you connect those dots?
Sure. It's a great topic and certainly one that's timely, not just for the Department of War, but other federal agencies. We think we're at a unique point in time for government agencies, particularly with artificial intelligence, machine learning, an empowered and upskilled workforce to deliver on the promise of back office services. We don't call them back office services in this report. We call them mission support services. Because within the Department of War, Department of Defense, it is absolutely critical that they make the most of their budget and their priorities to focus on the mission of the department and the priorities to meet the national defense strategy and to enable our national security. We think we have a unique period of time for the department to deliver at speed and scale. They're doing this in their mission. Secretary Hegseth talked about this about a week ago, about acquisition transformation. And they can do that, take that same approach to mission support services that enable the mission of warfighters, improves readiness, enables the department to do their mission, and from an employee perspective, improves the ability of employees to leverage new technologies to deliver on their tasks in support of the mission.
So you and I both spent some time wandering the halls of the Pentagon on the OSD staff. Many enterprise reform efforts have failed or come up short when it comes to being deployed in DoD. Talk us through some of the cultural difficulties and the organizational difficulties in doing this kind of reform.
Well, as you and your listeners know well, that the department is budgeted and funded through appropriations under Title X, right? Military departments are funded to drive the performance of their military departments, aligned with Department of War, Department of Defense priorities and national defense strategy. So part of the budget process would argue against this, but in order for them to achieve the efficiencies and effectiveness that the department needs to drive its mission capabilities, there's a consolidation that's critical for them to achieve that speed and scale we talked about earlier. We think that this is a unique opportunity because for the first time, at least in my experience, working in the Pentagon and agencies supporting the Pentagon, they have a number of private sector leaders that are present in key leadership positions across the Department of War and Department of Defense, that this is second nature to them. Improving performance, delivering on customer experience, reducing costs, recapitalization, and empowering and upskilling the workforce is what they have done in private sector, and they're bringing that same experience and insights to their government positions now inside the Pentagon. So we think because of technology, leadership, and the current environment of cost savings and delivery on mission, this is the right time to have this conversation.
People have said for years that Fortune 100 global companies can do this and are incentivized to do this, but the military operates under different constraints. So all of those private sector folks sometimes run up against some real obstacles in the military. What are some of the lessons that you think from the corporate world that can realistically be applied inside DoD?
That's a great point. You know, we cannot expect to apply all the lessons from private sector to the Department of Defense or Department of War. It's just particularly not carte blanche. It is a unique mission. It is critical to our national security. It is critical to our economic security globally. And so the Deloitte team has significant experience throughout the years working with Fortune 100 companies to stand up technology-driven multifunctional back offices. So this brings together HR, IT, finance, and acquisition are the four that we specifically focused on in terms of our mission support services in this paper. And our work in private sector, we enable that consolidation, centralization, and mission focus of these cross-functional teams. Many agencies in private sector or companies in private sector call this a global business service. We tend to refer to it in Deloitte as sort of a center office concept, not a back office, because these offices and functions are critical to the mission of the performance of government agencies. For the private sector, we call them business units, critical to the performance of business units, lowering cost, driving efficiencies, delivering on profit and loss statements to enable shareholder interest. In government, we think it's more critical. It's delivering on mission. This is not just about cost effectiveness and performance and efficiencies. It's delivering on mission.
I'm speaking with Tom Muir. He's a specialist executive with Deloitte. So, Tom, one of the big recommendations in your report is that all of this can be AI-enabled, taking an AI-first approach. Talk us through how that would work. Is that sort of a way to bridge what kind of have been long-running cultural differences between the services and the DoD staff? And what safeguards need to be in place if you're going to deploy AI in a defense sector?
That's a great question. The Department of Defense is accelerating the adoption of advanced AI right now and machine learning in support of military capabilities to address their national security challenges. That same approach applies for these functional areas of HR, IT, finance, and contracting. Many of us employ AI routinely in our daily lives, and the workforce ought to be able to employ AI in their workforce lives to deliver on mission. We think AI can immediately apply to a wide range of DoD missions. When we think about AI to improve audit readiness, right? The Department of Defense is under a statutory requirement to get a clean audit by December of 2028. And the department truthfully has struggled with that remediation projects over the previous years. There's a unique ability right now with the technologies available in AI and machine learning to drive that audit readiness, audit remediation, enterprise data management, acquisition of common goods and services at a lower cost point, at greater efficiency and greater performance. There's an ability for them to gain significant momentum in some of these projects that they've already undertaken and pilots that they've advanced for the use of AI and ML technologies, and deliver those tools to their workforce and upskill this workforce to use those tools to deliver better performance. We think we're at a unique point, rather, for our agencies to do this within the Department of Defense, within the Pentagon.
So, Tom, I looked at the back of the report, and there's a What DoD Can Do Today page, and I thought we could have pulled this from 1990 or 2000 or 2010 or 2020. What makes today's environment different where Deloitte thinks that this is actually achievable?
The Deloitte team has taken this approach, particularly with the Department of War, Department of Defense, because we think it's based on three things. The first is it is a tech-forward approach to solving some of these pervasive problems that you and I just talked about, Terry, that have been very difficult for government agencies to move forward over decades, right? We've done a bunch of shared services initiatives that have not gotten the department very far, not just the Department of War, Department of Defense, but other agencies as well across the federal government. We think there's a second piece to this, and that is it's a show, not tell. We think there's an ability for AI and ML to deliver to workers and workforce, to not study the problem, but to demonstrate very rapidly in matters of weeks and months, not 6 months to a year, and implement technologies. And as you mentioned earlier, safeguard those technologies, right? There's a cybersecurity discussion and an ethical use of AI discussion to this challenge. And we think the department is putting together policies that do just that. And the third piece is focus on outcomes, not processes. Not business processes, but transforming business processes to deliver outcomes for the warfighter in the Department of Defense, Department of War's discussions, but for other agencies is to deliver outcomes for their departments, agencies, and bureaus. In business, it'd be deliver outcomes for the business units and profit and loss statements. That same discussion applies just to the bureaus and the agencies across the federal government.
So let's assume that DoD takes Deloitte's recommendations and moves out on them and implements them. 5 or 10 years down the road, what would look different, and how would you measure or demonstrate that the efficiencies have actually improved readiness?
A great question. In our minds, at least, as we discuss this amongst our teams and as we share this with our clients in the Pentagon and in other federal agencies, we think looking back, right, 10 years from now, what does success look like? We think success is a consolidated mission support focused organization that delivers and manages standardized processes at speed and scale, leveraging technology to upskill the workforce, to allow them to deliver, to focus on cost and performance. We think when you look at the memorandums and the guidance that has come out recently from the Pentagon about recapitalization of the workforce, about acquisition transformation, it's about delivery at the scale necessary to defend our nation, to deter threats, and defeat them if necessary. We think that that's critical when you look back, from where we are today to that journey that they're going to undertake. And they've already taken many actions they've already begun. As you and I both worked in the Pentagon together, many of these actions are already in place. It's just a matter of bringing that capacity in a consolidated, multifunctional mission support organization that allows them to deliver on the mission of supporting warfighters more effectively, more efficiently, at higher performance, and lower cost. And then those cost savings can be put into critical capabilities necessary for warfighters at the front lines.
How much of this can DoD do on its own without asking permission from Congress? And how much does Congress officially need to support?
I believe that the department has had an ongoing conversation with Congress, particularly the oversight committees, both the HASC and the SASC in particular, and the appropriations committees, on their outcomes that they're looking to achieve by their transformation plans. We saw the first one just brought forward by the Secretary of War last week. Secretary Hegseth discussed where he thought the department needed to move with acquisition transformation. I think we're starting to see more of those in terms of direct report program, portfolio management offices, and how the department is tackling some of these large national security challenges. That dialogue is ongoing. I think the department can do all of this within its budget and take that budget and put it back towards warfighting missions, right? The cost savings that come from this multifunctional shared service delivery services in support of their mission can be put towards that frontline warfighting mission. So I think that this is savings to the department that they can then put against mission and delivery for warfighters.
I've been speaking with Tom Muir. He's a specialist executive with Deloitte. Tom, thanks so much for breaking this out for us, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that this is the right time.
Thank you so much, Terry, for having us on. It's been a remarkable journey, and DoD is well postured to drive this today.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, AI is stepping into the fight for supply chain resilience and battlefield readiness. But first, procurement could decide whether AI succeeds or fails in government. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A new guide from Open Contracting Partnership frames procurement as the key to effective AI adoption in government. It highlights how agencies can manage risk, cut through vendor hype, and foster collaboration between their IT and acquisition teams. We'll explore those insights with Katrin Frauscher, Deputy Executive Director at the Open Contracting Partnership. Katrin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've got some new guidance out that says procurement is where AI's potential becomes reality. Talk to us about what you mean there and why the buying process is so critical to make sure that we have successful AI adoption in government.
Absolutely. And what a great question. Thank you so much. We really think that flexible and responsible procurement will make AI work for the public. So if you care that artificial intelligence delivers for your government workforce or for the residents that you serve, it really matters that you pay attention how you purchase AI and how you implement AI.
Tell me more about flexible procurement practices. What are you suggesting?
What I'm suggesting is using a non-technical term to mean that you can adjust your procurement processes to what you're buying, that you can make them short and quick, and so that they work for your specific purpose. Experts sometimes call that agile, but I think we in the normal world just would call it flexible.
And why is the speed piece of that so important?
Speed matters because procurement has the reputation, but also indeed often is rather slow and bureaucratic. But technology moves fast. So if you want something, quickly or something that can remain adaptable to your environment, you need to make sure that your purchasing methods and vehicles are equally fast and flexible.
Well, speed comes into play in another aspect of this because there's a lot of hype maybe and a lot of attention around building custom AI solutions, but that is not fast. And your research shows that most agencies want to buy off-the-shelf tools. So Talk to us about what that might mean then for the procurement teams and the processes.
Yeah, I would love to. That was actually one of the big surprises. We did this research project for about a year. And when we went into it, we also expected that we would find out that there are a lot of custom products out there, a lot of what they call requests for proposals, where you really take time to buy the technology that you need for a specific purpose. What we found out is that most people buy technology through existing platforms, vehicles at the central level. So that changes the game of how both I get my AI technology, but also what I need to pay attention to along the way.
One of the reasons that a traditional procurement process is so slow is because it's pretty risk averse. And there are a lot of risks associated with AI. We hear about them all the time, bias, hallucination, all kinds of things. So how can leaders, especially procurement leaders, then balance caution and risk aversion with the need to move quickly to make sure that they're getting current AI technology?
Absolutely. You said it there yourself. I think the key word is balance. You have to balance caution and urgency. I like to say you can't move too slow so that you're missing out on things, but you can't move too fast so that you're not ready. So it's all about the balance of being fast enough so that you get what you need, but slow enough so that you're ready.
Is there a governance role involved in that, and what would you suggest?
Absolutely. One of the things that our research found is that being AI ready and having the needed governance frameworks is one of the most important things that governments can do. And a good governance framework is clear, it's written in plain language. It balances this level of risk of being fast, but also being prepared. And then I would say the key thing is to train your people on those frameworks. So don't just have it on a piece of paper, but make sure that people know how to use it.
We're talking specifically about buying AI tools, but what about using AI tools in the process of buying AI tools?
Absolutely. We see an equal hype about that than we see about everything around AI. We also see a similar trend that honestly, for now, a lot of the use cases are still pretty boring, I would say, in terms of help me write an RFP, help me work faster, but don't make the decisions. But as I like to tell my kids, boring things are very important too. So we are paying attention to how that is unfolding and how governments, again, can get the best use of AI while making sure it delivers the best outcomes for their residents.
I'm speaking with Catherine Frauscher. She's Deputy Executive Director at the Open Contracting Partnership. Catherine, one of the things that you also talk about is that the procurement, the IT, and the project teams often struggle to work together, especially when it comes to AI procurement. What recommendations do you have to improve that relationship?
Yeah, great question. We really think procurement is a team sport, and you need an extra strong team when you're purchasing AI technology. So the biggest advice is to come together early throughout the process and make sure that all of you are AI ready.
What does AI ready mean to you in that sense?
Yes, one of the biggest requests that we actually got from our procurement partners was we want to learn more about AI. We don't think we know enough yet to make good purchasing decisions. And I think that is true for many government officials.
The General Services Administration is trying to centralize some of this. Do you feel like they're doing a good job in defining AI and what the tools might be for the procurement and IT teams to be able to use?
Yeah, they are following a trend. Centralized purchasing of AI is definitely something that we see around the world. It has the advantage of giving you speed and standards. What you need to pay attention to is that the implementation and the use is still effective and adapted to each agency, and that each agency has the capacity to use AI well.
Well, speaking about not knowing enough about AI, one of the other issues that has come to light is vendors sometimes exaggerate a little bit about what their AI products can do. So if you were coaching procurement teams around this, what sort of questions should they be asking to kind of cut through the hype there and make sure they're getting real value, that they understand what they're buying?
Absolutely. We have some great questions for that in our guide. And I think the main thing I would ask my vendor counterpart to do is show me where you have done it successfully. Let me try first. So we are big believers in prototypes, demonstrations. Sometimes they have fun names like bake-offs, because if you see it work, then you know that it might help you better.
Tell us more about the specifics in your guide.
The guide. Yeah, the guide is really driven by many, many questions we got from governments around the world, especially the procurement teams that said, we have this need to buy AI, sometimes because we are curious, because we need it, or because we're being told to buy it. But how do we do it well? How do we do it in such a way that it serves our government workforce and maybe most importantly, our residents and our citizens? So that's really what the guide is about. It starts with telling procurement officers, procurement directors, the foundations about AI, because like I said before, they really wanted to learn more about that. And then how you can be a good team player, what we already also talked about. How can procurement have this role of bringing everyone together so that they can align around the goals and the use cases, the terms, the payments, and what you're getting.
It's got some really interesting scenarios, I think, in there that walk people through the process. Tell us maybe about one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have these pathways because it does depend on what you're trying to achieve with your technology, but also what purchasing vehicles are available to you, right? We sometimes like to think, if you think about it like a car, right? Today I need, the minivan or my small car or the bus. But in reality, procurement teams are often being told you have to use the bus. So we also have in the guide some hacks that if you use the bus, but you actually wanted to use a Jeep, what you can still do to get there.
It sounds like folks will find something in there that relates in some way to every situation that they're facing.
We hope so. We really wanted to make it practical and not, theoretical piece of work.
So, Catherine, we're really just at the dawn of folks buying AI for government application. If you transport yourself 5 years down the road, what do you think will be different? And what do you think the lessons learned at that point will be?
Yes, great question. Honestly, I think we don't know what it will be like in 5 years from now. I think AI is changing and evolving at a speed that we haven't seen that often before. But I think that also means that your procurement process needs to be ready to evolve. And like we said in the very beginning, it needs to be flexible so that if AI evolves, you can still get what you need and you're not stuck with something from 2 or 3 years ago.
I've been speaking with Catherine Frauscher. She's Deputy Executive Director at Open Contracting Partnership. Thanks so much for these insights and for the guide.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, AI is stepping into the fight for supply chain resilience and battlefield readiness. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Defense leaders warn that fragile supply chains and maintenance bottlenecks could undermine readiness. Advanced AI-powered world models can help integrate real-time logistics data, predict disruptions, and accelerate manufacturing agility. Here to explain what smart logistics means for the military and the defense industrial base is John Garrity, CEO of TagUp, Inc. Mr. Garrity, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks, Terry, for having me.
We're going to talk about military supply chain and logistics. A lot of defense leaders are still warning that supply chains are fragile despite some modernization, despite post-pandemic recovery. From your perspective, how can AI play a role in building the resilience of those defense supply chains?
I think AI plays a critical role, and the reason is that supply chains are intrinsically very complex. There's a lot of information. It's hard to grapple with all of it, right? You have end users who have some visibility into what they might have at a forward supply point, and you've got the manufacturers who are receiving signals from higher level commands and from headquarters, and there's a lot of latency between those different points of signal. And so AI presents an opportunity to effectively coordinate and orchestrate across that supply network, optimize decisions on everything from purchasing to stocking to mobilization, transportation, all different elements of supply chain logistics operations. So it really is a new paradigm in the way that supply chain logistics can be orchestrated.
The Defense Logistics Agency tells us that they're now running dozens of AI models to monitor supplier risk and to forecast disruptions. When you think about the options out there, what do you think the most promising AI-driven approaches are to identifying vulnerabilities early and fixing them before they become problems?
So a lot of the traditional approaches to using machine learning and supply chain applications come into things like demand forecasting or identifying patterns, right, in the data. And obviously the zeitgeist now is all around large language models and how those can be applied. But the challenge is when you look at the initial attempts, you're focused on a very small set or subset of the logistics enterprise, which again could be demand forecasting, but that's just a piece of the puzzle. And on the flip side, you have these very general models like a large language model that can answer very general questions in incredible ways, but they aren't grounded in the realities of supply chain. They don't have ways to reason over or optimize over such a large scale system. So the new opportunity, and one we're focused at with TagUp, is building a world model, it's called. So basically providing structure such that you can reason effectively over these large scale systems, right? What is the relationship between the receipt of materials and the use of those materials, of transportation from a manufacturer and expiration of material downrange, right? Hard questions to reason about at scale for humans and even for legacy approaches. But now with these world models, you can effectively reason at that scale.
We're talking about supply chain here, but we're also hearing from the Air Force and the Army who are investing heavily in AI-enabled predictive maintenance to cut down on downtime and improve readiness. How do predictive analytics, sort of like what you were just talking about, your world model and supply chain, how can that apply to traditional maintenance models?
Yeah, very directly. So predicting a specific component failure on a specific asset is very difficult, right? Even if you have it very well instrumented, it's a hard problem, but it's a useful demand signal. And certainly when you aggregate it over a fleet, you can get very high levels of accuracy and understanding, okay, in aggregate, how many replacement transmissions will we need for this program, right? As an example. And the reason is it's similar to picking stocks. It's hard to pick the one stock that's going to get you 100x returns. So you buy a portfolio and you're going to have one that's going to give you that high return. Similarly, if you have a fleet of vehicles or a fleet of aircraft, you don't know which one is going to have that catastrophic engine failure, but you know across the fleet that prediction, that event will occur with some level of certainty, and that can inform upstream in the world model what decisions are being made. So in short, it's a very useful input to the overall optimization, but it's just a piece of the puzzle.
When you think about the array of military equipment, I mean, everything from water filtration units to F-35s and aircraft carriers, how complicated is it to scale an AI model to cover that scope of inventory?
Yeah, great question. The answer is that there are, regardless of what asset or platform you're looking at, there's a lot of commonality, right? They all have parts that are installed on them, replacement parts. They have distribution around the world. They have certain patterns of utilization, maintenance requirements. So the world model can encode these basic rules that relate these elements and then can take the data that exists today. And I think that's a big opportunity, right? When you look at even at predictive maintenance, there's so much data that exists in existing IT systems related to service requests, parts required, requisition, all kinds of things. And there's a lot of signal in it. But to employ that signal effectively, you need to be able to provide that structure. And so in short, in spite of the scale, it actually is a strength for these AI models, because if you can apply that structure, the models can get better much faster because of the scale of the enterprise. So that's the opportunity with that scale.
I'm speaking with John Garrity. He's the founder of TagUp, Inc. One more maintenance question, just because maintenance is near and dear to my heart. Congress and DoD are pushing right to repair provisions to let service members fix their own equipment using digital manuals and 3D printing. How do you see AI intersecting with that approach?
In a couple of important ways, right? One we're looking at now is changing the way that so take 3D printers as an example. Where do you put 3D printers, right? And there are now platforms where they have 3D printers in containers. They can be moved around the world. But where should you put those sources of supply, right? And so if you have data from maintainers as to what parts are required, you can ensure that via an optimization, you locate the sources of supply, the advanced manufacturing, other capabilities close to the point of use. And so I think that's one way that AI will improve the maintainer experience, is making sure they have the the tools and the parts that are necessary closer to the point of use, and basically ultimately reduce non-mission capable rates due to supply and maintenance.
Okay, let's take one step back from the military units themselves and talk about manufacturing capacity. Companies are using AI and advanced manufacturing to compress production timelines and reduce parts counts. How do you see these technologies then changing surge capacity, industrial base opportunities? Sort of what's next on the front there?
Right. And actually, I think it is intimately tied in with military as the ultimate customer, right? What's critical is avoiding whiplash effect and having visibility upstream to the manufacturers as to what demands are they and how can they be satisfied. And I think the opportunity is, and it's coming to play now, where if you can track use of equipment, of parts at the tip of the spear, downrange, and provide visibility back to the manufacturers across the enterprise, now the OEMs, the manufacturers, can understand how their equipment that they manufacture is being used, where it's being used, where there are issues, and that can inform their investments. If you could, right now, the purchasing for these programs is done in the current fiscal year, right? There's not visibility over many years into the future. That's a huge lost opportunity, both for negotiating better prices with the manufacturing base, but also ensuring that the capacity exists into the future. So I think that's one of the most exciting opportunities for these sort of systems at scale, is giving visibility to the manufacturers as to what are the demands in out years.
And that seems to take us right back to where we started, which was with supply chains and making sure that not only the military supply chain, but the commercial supply chain stays safe, secure, predictable.
Most interesting applications, in my view, of these new AI systems is the ability to identify systematically what links in the supply chain provide the most risk against readiness or other operational requirements. And so you can be very systematic in identifying, okay, how can we shore up capacity or ensure that we have redundancy and supply to avoid getting just hammered on our readiness rates. And I think that's one of the ultimate aim, in my view, from these sorts of systems, is to be able to tie practical use of the end users, aggregated at scale, and provide that visibility and signal back to the industrial base, all the way back to the supply chain. And by doing that, we can strip out a lot of the inefficiency in the system and drive higher quality of service to the end customer.
Real-time decision-making inside the system that you just described has always been sort of the holy grail of military logistics. As you think about the future of integrating AI into each of those pieces and parts, are there any concerns that you have about the cultural obstacles or individual training obstacles that might make it difficult to optimize the value?
I think it's certainly a paradigm shift in sort of the user experience, right? So yeah, I'm sure you've long history and experience, Terry, in military logistics and in the private sector too. ERP systems have been with us for many years, right? Enterprise resource planning systems, and they track what we have and where we have them. And you have to know a lot of different codes and keyboard shortcuts to be able to efficiently navigate these systems. And then ultimately, you put those into reports that you can summarize up to your commanding officers. And what's changing now is that, as you've maybe seen with ChatGPT related technologies, now you can just ask questions directly and get answers. The challenge, of course, operationalizing those for defense applications and supply chain is grounding it in the reality of the situation, making sure you're not hallucinating, right? You can't just ask ChatGPT for docking policies. So there is risk that needs to be mitigated to make sure, and that's something we provide explicitly by providing that structure in the world model, that you can make sure that the answers you're getting, the COAs that are recommended, are grounded in reality. But I do think there's going to be a bit of a learning curve that I think will be tempered by the fact that a lot of people are using large language models now. There's a familiarity in private use with these sorts of technologies. I think in many ways it will be a more intuitive user experience, but it will be a transition from the historical way of interacting with IT systems and log IT systems specifically.
I've been speaking with John Garrity. He's the founder of TagUp, Inc. I really appreciate the practical application perspective on AI. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. It took several years, including some false starts, but the Defense Department's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program is now a reality. The final rules are in place, and several hundred contractors have already earned their third-party certifications. But most of the initial implementation work will happen over the next year. For a look at the work ahead, Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday talked with Matthew Travis. He's the CEO of the Cyber Accreditation Body, the nonprofit organization that helps manage the certification process.
In essence, what you'll see in year one, which is, it's now started, the clock is ticking. For the next 12 months, you'll see requirements in new solicitations, so new contracts are being bid out, or potentially option years or contract extensions. They can be inserted, the department will be inserting level 1 CMMC requirements and also level 2 self-assessment. So level 2 is the bifurcated part of CMMC model where you could potentially get requirements that just require you to self-assess, or you're going to be required to hire a C3PO, a third party, to validate that. Year one of the phase implementation primarily focuses on level 1 FCI, Federal Contract Information self-assessment, or level 2 self-assessment for the 110 requirements in the NIST 800 standard. Now, the department in phase 1, in this first year, has reserved the right to insert the certification by C3PO requirements in select contracts. So we'll have to see, and I suspect we will see some of those. I don't know what programs would be, but you can imagine they're probably ones that are closer to operations and the tip of the spear, so to speak. So the department has reserved that right. So I think it's important to note that those are two different things, level 1 and level 2, right? So level 1 is the federal contract information. Level 2 is the controlled unclassified information. You can have companies that get both of those requirements because, in essence, they might have different scopes. Federal contract information is probably going to be more widely shared in some cases. Your financial controllers will need access to the contracts, maybe your business developers, whereas the CUI may be restricted in an enclave only to those people who are working on the project who actually need to store, transmit, or process CUI. So I think sometimes people think, well, year one, I'm not going to be forced to hire a C3PO. I may have to do a self-assessment, and if I get level 1, then I'll just do level 2 instead. But there's really two different things. So folks need to kind of pay attention to the contracts that come out with CMMC requirements or to their own vehicles that have option years or extensions. What exact requirements are those contracting officers putting in there? That's year 1. Year 2, then we go to, you'll be seeing on a regular basis those C3PO certification requirements for level 2, and then in the third year, level 3. And then the department's plan is that by 3 years into it, we are at scale. The ecosystem is mature, and CMMC is just a way of life now.
Right. Well, and for the longest time with this program, I think there's been this perception that companies are just kind of taking a wait-and-see approach. Is this really going to happen? Clearly, it is. But even now, with this ramp-up, are you seeing companies, organizations still kind of take that approach, or are they taking it more seriously? Are you seeing an increased interest or even demand at this point in certification?
We are seeing an increase, certainly an increase in the town hall attendance that we get at our monthly virtual town hall. We've seen an increase in the conferences, not only the ones that we put on, but the ones that we attend. But most notably, to your question, Justin, we are seeing a continued growth in the number of level 2 certification assessments that are being done on a voluntary basis. We're just under 500 now for level 2. But also the number of individuals who are becoming assessors, or at least entering the training pipeline to become assessors. Now, some of those are coming from C3POs who need more personnel to conduct assessments, but we're also seeing a number of defense contractors sending their own personnel to become certified assessors, so they have some in-house expertise. And so the numbers of those classes that are trained for CCA or the apprentice level, which is the CMMC Certified Professional or CCP, are increasing. I still think there are some holdouts, to be honest with you. Folks are going to think, I'll just wait till I see it in my contract before I move out. I think the risk there is, which we've been beating this drum for a number of years, is that CMMC Level 2 is not something you can just assign some mid-level IT admin manager to do over a weekend. It really requires a whole of organization to buy in to not only the specific requirements of the CMMC standard, but really, when you look at it, is cybersecurity inculcated on how you do business? That's what the assessors want to look for, is that it's not a checklist assessment or an inspection. It is, are you meeting the standard that the department has set for its business partners. And even at level 1, which a lot of people dismiss as, oh, it's just level 1, there's only 15 objectives. There are actually 59 assessment objectives when you drill down, 59 things you have to do at level 1. So for those companies who have either kind of procrastinated, because these requirements generally have been in their contracts anyway, CMMC is only the validation and certification that you've done that. For those companies who have been dragging their feet, I think they'll find themselves having to hustle a bit to get caught up, because it's not just the contracts that you might have that you're gauging, okay, when do I need to go ahead and implement? Who knows what's going to be put out for bid, and you might find yourself with opportunity cost loss of not being eligible to go after some of those new contracts that have CMMC requirements.
Sure. And it's certainly not something where a year from now you want to wake up and see that in your solicitation and not have done any preparatory work at all. Yeah. Well, let's talk about what we've learned so far. We've learned so far about organizations who have gone through and gotten a CMMC Level 2 certification, or perhaps have failed that assessment for at least the time being. You said just under 500 so far have gotten that voluntary Level 2 certification. What have you learned about that process, both from the assessor side and from the organization seeking certification, in terms of just what's important to be taking into account?
I think early on, Justin, we saw, so really Level 2 certification assessments started being conducted February, March of this year. And early on, anecdotally, we certainly heard a number of false starts where you had companies who had been following CMMC, thought they understood kind of the level of effort required, and then when the C3POs conducted that phase 1, so the CMMC assessment process has 4 phases. That first phase is really to ascertain if the company is actually ready to be evaluated. And so the C3PO is looking at their system security plan, they're looking at their schematic diagrams of their network and their scoping of what's in scope for the assessment. Do they have evidence ready? And in a number of cases, I don't have any stats, but we heard frequently from the C3POs that they had to call it off. Mutually, once the OSC, the organization seeking certification, realized all the things that they hadn't fully done, and the C3PO said, we might want to pause here and go back to work and call us when you're ready. There were a number of those. I'm hearing less of that anecdotally. I think from and that was coming really from the C3POs. From some of the defense contractors that we've heard from at our conference and elsewhere, what we continue to hear is what I touched on earlier, that it does require an organizational commitment, and that they realize there are physical security requirements, there are training requirements that HR has to be involved in, there are leadership requirements in terms of resourcing to making sure you're conforming to the 110 requirements. And that was probably the biggest takeaway. And the second one, which is really important, that you really need to know your external service provider. In this day and age, in 2025, a lot, if not most, of the defense contractors are using either a managed service provider, a cloud service provider, a managed security service provider to help with the administration and operation of their IT environment. Well, when you're using what CMMC calls an ESP, an external service provider, you are now bringing, most likely, especially if they're storing, processing, or transmitting CUI, into your assessment scope. And so it's critical that defense firms understand not only what their external service provider is doing for them, how are they characterized? Are they actually a cloud service provider? Because there are different requirements if it is a cloud service provider than it is if it's a managed service provider or a managed security service provider. So that understanding of who's actually assisting you in meeting all those 110 requirements, you'll get stopped cold if it turns out you thought you were using an MSP, but actually you're using a cloud provider based on what they're doing for you, and now there's a FedRAMP requirement in the mix as opposed to just a CMMC Level 2. So knowing who's helping you and knowing your organization is fully committed are probably the 2 biggest takeaways that we're hearing from industry.
That's Matthew Travis, the CEO of the Cyber Accreditation Body. To watch his full conversation with Justin Doubleday, check out our Risk and Compliance Exchange at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editors are Daisy Thornton and Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.